Halt! You there? Please wait. You're Geralt of Rivia, are you not?
Depends who's asking.
Hello, this is Demon Phoenix with another installment of my New Game Plus Deathmarch walkthrough. Now, we left it off after we had done Kira's Wandering in the Dark mission, and we're just continuing with a little bit of the story here. So, as always, we are using Arendite for this particular part of the walkthrough. Arendite is still one of the most powerful swords, and if you're struggling to actually keep it charged up, you can consider switching away from Euphoria. So you see here I'm using Mutated Skin. We discussed this previously in another episode, but when things take a couple more hits to kill, each strong strike will increase the charge by 2, so you can get a few more strikes in and level it up a little bit easier. You're also getting towards the sort of level where we can think about alternative swords though, so that's something to bear in mind, and we'll cover that a little bit later. Now we need to do the Bloody Barons missions. Now a lot of the Bloody Barons quests, they just have fairly generic encounters, so for the parts where you're fighting the Wraith, you would just switch to the Viper gear and the medium set of Grandmaster trousers, whichever you're carrying, which in my case is Manticore, and then you have to fight quite a few enemies in the swamp, but they're all necrophages apart from that relic. Now one of the things you just saw there is for fighting one-on-one enemies. I was using Aard Sweep, and there's a very specific reason for that, and that's something that we can come on to when we've got enough skills to have finished the build and put all the ability points into the mutations and skills that we want. Now this is just for a general point of reference, because one of the themes of this New Game Plus walkthrough is that if you have the correct build, New Game Plus can be easier than if you have the different type of build where you'll take a lot of damage. So this is still using the Uber build, and a couple of the contracts that we covered in the equivalent part of my regular game walkthrough was this, where you have to fight Ignatius Fatus. That's difficult. There you go, Ignis Fatus, the quite difficult fight against a very damaging Foglet, and I recommended that you normally leave that a bit later, but as you can see here, no such drama this time. We've got World Severance, and we just destroy everything with the immense amount of damage, and as long as you have the correct oil, which for him would be necrophage oil, then you're taking very little damage. So that's another bonus of doing New Game Plus with this build. Now again, just as I mentioned for the Barons parts, Barons quest parts, we can also use the elemental armor resistances, and that's one of the things that the Uber build doesn't have, and that's specifically designed to have very good slashing, piercing, bludgeoning and monster resistance. But the elemental doesn't matter, because you can always switch to the Viper chest or to the Manticore pants or one of the other Grandmaster medium sets of pants, and that gives you a massive amount of elemental resistance with protective coating 25% when you have the Spectral as well. So you can see here that I'm using Killing Spree, even though it's a single enemy. Don't forget that although you can't change your actual abilities in combat, you can switch out Killing Spree if you know that you're fighting a specific single enemy, because Killing Spree only triggers when you kill enemies in a fight. So you kill 1 or 2 enemies and it pretty much guarantees you critical hits. But if you're only fighting one enemy, then that skill, is amazing as it is against groups, it is actually useless against a single enemy. So you can always switch it out for Tissue Transmutation or something else, one of the other skills that we've got, and make use of that versus single opponents. One of the other things you can do is, whatever level your Griffin Gear quest becomes available, you can go and get the Griffin Gear and the Griffin Gear swords. Now Arendite will probably still be more powerful than the Griffin Silver Sword, just depending on if you've been keeping up with the extra permanent damage that you can get on Arendite. But the Steel Sword, it depends on whether you want to keep the bonuses from your Steel Sword that you carried over from New Game Plus, and indeed what level of Steel Sword that is. Now you may remember that I got the level 61 Hengaida Sword, so it was as powerful as possible at level 61, because I started New Game Plus at level 61 as well. But if you have the Toussaint Knight Steel Sword instead, or some other sword like that, which is a fixed level, say that you got the Toussaint Knight Steel Sword at level 48, then if you started New Game Plus at level 50 something, you may be getting to the point where the Steel Swords may be able to surpass the damage from that in New Game Plus, even considering the higher critical hit bonus that the Hengaida or Toussaint Knight Steel Sword have. So you can look at the DPS once you've crafted the Griffin Silver Sword and the Griffin Steel Sword, and see if you would prefer to swap one or both of those swords. And you start using that at this point. Now just bear in mind that unless you have been a little bit insane, like we covered in episode 2, and unlock the rune right, you won't be able to put an enchantment on those swords. So it's not just whether you want to increase the damage by having those swords, it's whether you can put up with not having an enchantment and you want to just have those swords with the normal range of Rend and Whirl. But that is something to consider, and is something that you need to look out for. So in order to get the Griffin quest, you need to have the Eye of Nehelani to be able to get out of the back of the cave after you fight the Echimera, and you just want to be using your vampire oil for that, but this will be a very easy fight as well, so don't be concerned about that. If you've switched the elemental gear for when you're taking out the wraiths in this part of the grotto, then you want to switch back to your normal gear, although your monster resistance from the Viper chest would probably be high enough to just beat that vampire anyway. So not a major concern, but a very useful thing to do is to be able to get the legendary Griffin gear, and that is basically, like I say, scaled up versions. Now, even though the legendary Griffin gear is the New Game Plus version of the armor, the resistances won't be higher than your Ursine in particular. The resistances are sort of reset, so it's almost like getting a higher armor value but a lower monster resistance and things like that. So just bear that in mind. We'll be sticking with the same gear for the Uber build at the moment. Now, this is the core outline of the skills, and then we covered how you get all the skill points from Skellige in episode 2 and have as many skill points as possible. But whatever build you want to, whatever version of the build you want to have, this is the basic outlines. So we've got the first 3 skills down to Whirl and Rend for the fast and strong attack trees, and then Razor Focus. I've only got 1 point in Rend and Razor Focus here, and we're just showing the outline. So these are the skills that we have going down here. Protective Coating and Synergy are pretty much non-negotiable, they're essential skills. And then we have the Mutation as Euphoria. Now see here, this is I had to restart the New Game Plus in order to catch up on some footage that I lost. So this gives me the opportunity to demonstrate the core outline of the build again, and how you might be building it up. So this is with the enough mutations for the Strength and Synapses slots, but not enough for the 4th Strength and Synapses slot, and so you see we've got a lot of points to play with. Now the reason that I'm showing this, even though I've already covered it in the previous episode, is you can have either the heightened tolerance version of the build, where you use 3 decoctions and potions, which would need heightened tolerance and acquired tolerance equipped at all times with metabolic control, and then you have your killing spree, or you can use the skill switching version, which is covered in some of my other videos, and you can just switch those skills out after you've used the decoctions. But one of the other options that you can do is you get to about this level 70 something when you get to that point in the game, and everybody's level for starting level will be different, so it depends on if you did any grinding or what level you finished Blood and Wine at before you started New Game Plus. But you can choose to either put these points into the abilities, or when you get to sort of level 75ish, you can start looking at some of the other abilities. Now you can have enough points at those sort of levels to be able to complete all of the mutations and have all the strength and synapses slots, and then you have these points for the rest of the game to play around with. Now what you can do is put those into different skills that you're not going to use all the time, or you can play around with the build and make some changes as you see fit if you want to experiment with something a little different. For example, normally we have rage management, but one of the things you can do is when you have these extra points is you can have Aard Sweep instead and use 4 decoctions, with the 4th one being the Ancient Leshen decoction. So instead of being able to use your adrenaline points to cast signs and having rage management equipped, you can have Aard Sweep and the Ancient Leshen decoction instead. Now that's very effective because although Aard won't knock enemies over, it still stuns them. And every time you use Aard Sweep, it uses only about half of your stamina bar. And every time you use it in a fight, the Ancient Leshen decoction will mean that the stamina regeneration increases. So if you want to see the full mechanics of that, you can check out my video about the Ancient Leshen decoction and how it works. So you see here, this is me at level 68, so instead of putting all of the points into mutations, I've got enough to just keep the 3 strength and synapses slots, so we haven't unlocked the last 4 mutations yet. And this is how it works. So we've got Aard Sweep and the Ancient Leshen decoction, and we're taking on an enemy here that's about 15 or 20 levels higher than us. And you can see that with Arendite, this is extremely useful when you're fighting a single enemy. And the reason it works is because you can stun them, and then you see that the stamina just gets quicker and quicker, and Aard Sweep doesn't even take the whole stamina bar. So you can repeatedly use it and stun the enemy, get in a heavy strike, or even rend, or you could start whirling or any of that stuff. And the stamina regen is so quick that you can maintain your full adrenaline, still cast Quen like I did there, and then almost have Aard Sweep instantly again. It's very useful against single enemies, and it's still very useful against groups of enemies as well. So that's something to bear in mind. There are also some fun things you can see in New Game Plus, like if you didn't have reason to go back to Oxenfurt when you had 30k, 35,000 crowns in Hearts of Stone, you might never have seen this, which is a little nod to the Walter Mitty character, and it's a fun little thing where a tax collector stops you and he asks you a few questions, so it's always worth going back to Oxenfurt when you have over 35,000 crowns, just to be able to do this little exchange as well. So that's covering a few other things you can do there. So you can personalise the build a little bit and see if you like the Aard Sweep version, and don't be afraid to make a manual save and then mess around with the potion of clearance and maybe the potion of restoration, and experiment with the abilities a little bit. So look at episode 2 that we covered there and this episode, and see which version you want to use or how you maybe want to tailor a few things differently. So what we're going to be continuing with in the next episode is a little bit of Novigrad and how we do the missions there, and also covering something I tried a little differently this time, which was to have the Scoia'tael deck and use that for a challenge, as I'd mentioned before. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.